I don't know if you've ever heard of wabi sabi,
I
if
have
it
not.
sounds kind of familiar.
The only thing is it sounds familiar because I've heard wasabi before, but that's the closest thing I've heard. Hello and welcome back to the Ghost Book Archive. This is chapter 12. Today, as always, I'm joined by Silver.
Hi.
My name's Ryan, and we also have a very special guest, Pippa Phillips.
Hello.
Today is all about haiku. It's all about poetry. Pippa is known for her poetry. She is very proficient in writing her own sort of haiku. And so we thought it would be perfect to bring this episode and the whole theme of the poetry and the haiku. But yeah, so Pippa, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of your interest in poetry and sort of your background in that?
Well, I have written poetry, fiction. I've actually written a book. I'm working on two others currently. So I like to say that I write short things and long things. And I also lived in Japan for a while. I love Japanese literature, particularly, say, shonen, and Natsume Soseki. But I actually really did not particularly like haiku. While I was living there, my boss at the time gave me this great book of haiku, and that was my kind of introduction to beyond the sort of standard haiku that you would hear. It wasn't really until 2020 and COVID that I had dropped out of my philosophy PhD program, and I was on Twitter, and I was seeing the sort of freeform experimental haiku that people
Mm.
were writing on Twitter, and I was like, "Oh, this is actually really interesting." Oren Prijin in particular was writing this kind of incredible senryu, really. So senryu isn't quite haiku, although it derives from the haiku tradition, and it involves a lot more sort of human feeling. There's less of a connection to
Okay.
nature. There's a sort of wider emotional spectrum. And he was also sort of writing about a lot of the poets and philosophy that he was following. So I started to just sort of become more active in the haiku community. I did ultimately want to write the sort of experimental poetry I was reading, but I decided to go the traditional route
Mm.
first because
Okay.
I thought, rules are always broken better if you understand the rules that you're breaking. And I've always sort of remained connected to haiku because there is a connection to nature
Yeah.
and a connection to your current world and your experience that I find sort of valuable. And I think at the time, I would just go out walking and I started to understand how much of my natural world I didn't know. I didn't know what
Yeah.
trees I was looking at. I didn't know what vegetation I was looking at. And so I started becoming interested in that because the poetry is a little bit better if you can talk about a sycamore tree rather than any sort of random tree, or if you can talk about a cumulonimbus as opposed to just random clouds and stuff.
Mm.
Specificity is always a little bit better with
Yeah.
poetry. So at this point, I've been published in multiple different journals. I've guest edited Haiku Dialogue and Whiptail Journal of One Line Poetry and Failed Haiku, which is actually a Senryu journal. And I've been a book reviewer for Frog Pond and Juxtaposition for a little while
Oh,
now.
Okay.
So yeah, pretty deep in the
Yeah.
micro poetry world now.
yeah, that's very cool. I like hearing about that, like being more specific with your descriptions. That sounds very interesting to me.
Obviously you've got a huge focus on haiku. Is that mainly what you stick to, or do you do other sorts of poetry as well? Is
I
that
do
just
other sorts of
yeah?
poetry. I'm really kind of actually moving away from haiku a little bit. I
Mm.
stopped
Okay.
publishing for a year so that I could devote a
Yeah.
little bit more time to freeform poetry. And I'm going to sort of open mics and open readings. And I do maintain, like, I'm always writing haiku and
Yeah.
senryu, and I'm always trying to introduce people to it because I do think it's the kind of poetry that really could be popular
Mm.
in our current short attention span
Yeah.
time.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Um, and I always I'm very interested in writing poetry that even if you don't know anything about haiku, you might find kind of interesting So, like, lately, I've been going out to zine fests and selling these little, like, I have these little, like, micro chapbooks of,
Okay.
like I'm like, I write
Mm,
micro poetry, so I'll have micro
Yeah, yeah.
chapbooks and, like, stickers, and I have, like, a haiku bracelet on right now. So I also run a Discord where I teach people about haiku. So I'm
Mhm.
kind of like a haiku evangelist, but yeah,
Okay.
I've been heavily trying to pivot away from micro poetry. Like, I'll always write it, but I'm doing a lot
Yeah.
more freeform, experimental type poetry now. Yeah.
Oh, I like that a lot. I like that, and as you say, just having stickers and stuff. It's perfect for haiku and that sort of poetry because it's one of those things, as you were saying as well. The short attention span culture that we have today, the world, everyone's just constantly scrolling and scrolling. No, a lot of people don't want to read 3 pages of something. They just want to get a little bite, and oh, that grabbed them, and then they just want to maybe repost that somewhere or they save that there and then.
mhm.
It's very hard to get someone's attention to listen to you for 10 minutes, whereas it's very easy to get them to listen for 10 seconds. It does sound like it is something that could definitely take off, I think.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with it
Fingers
there.
crossed.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully. I think it
Yeah.
should be pushed a little bit more. It's not something I hear about often. I don't see that many short form poems as opposed to the longer ones in the circles I'm in anyway. So
Yeah,
I
I
feel like
think that
it could get a bigger push.
people seem to have this idea that, they have to be that they have to know a huge amount to sort of
Mm,
write a proper haiku. But if you look at haiku poetry in Japan, if you look at sort of celebrated poets there, like, you'll often find out that, their day job was an accountant. It's
yeah.
Mm.
something that sort of is really accessible to everyone. But there's always been this kind of push pull in all of the arts in Japan, where at first it's a sort of like aristocratic thing, and then it becomes sort of more popularized. And usually, when it becomes more popularized and accessible, the arts get really reinvigorated. So, especially
Yeah.
if you look at what are considered kind of traditional Japanese arts, like ukiyo-e or bonraku, puppet theater,
Mm,
or haiku. These are all art forms that, during the Edo era, when there was this explosion of arts, it really became the art of the floating world rather than the aristocracy. The floating world was the sort of world of, like, gambling dens and geisha, and it was the sort of world that was more open to the sort of emerging mercantile class. You had
mm,
a sort of like new forms of the novel coming out that were meant to be accessible to people. I think that Masaoka Shiki, who is one of the forefathers of haiku, was sort of inspired when Japan opened to the West to sort of see
Okay.
how the sort of average person in the West memorized great swathes of poetry. And so he was very inspired to once again make haiku sort of accessible
yeah.
to the general public.
One of the things I would say I've definitely noticed, for example, when I looked at your Twitter feed and I saw you had a lot of haiku, and I always overthink everything I write, and so when I'm thinking poetry, like I struggle with some of this stuff because I think, oh, I can't put that many words in here. It's supposed to be micro poetry essentially. It's very short. It's very this, and one of the things that definitely caught my attention was how simple almost it seemed, and it was effortless. Some of your stuff you were writing. I don't have an example to mind, but to me it was so. I really it captured me just in the sense that it seemed so simple and I felt like I could never allow myself to just let it be like that. And I feel like there's a discipline and there's an art to just being able to say no, that is it, and it can be just easy to connect with. It can just be you read it and you move on with your day. It doesn't Not everything has to be insanely overthought to the point where you're going to have a breakdown because you can't find the exact right word. And like that's why people, as you were just saying, that's why there's a thing that where it becomes more accessible as it comes down from aristocracy and all the rest of it, because people feel like when it's still up here, it's too far away. If I need to have a degree to do that, I need to be an expert to do that. Whereas when you bring it sort of down to that more simple, I don't know if simple is the right word, but a bit more simple level, and it does become more accessible, and it's a totally different thing. So that's definitely something I noticed.
Yeah, I definitely use Twitter sometimes to just kind of workshop poetry.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I think I had a ridiculous thread the other day where I've been watching the debates in the states,
Hmm.
like where it was Trump versus Harris,
Yeah.
um, and JD Vance versus Waltz, and I was just sort of like reacting with haiku,
Hmm.
just like taking little bits of what they said and sort of putting it together. just because that was how I was
Yeah.
processing and getting through those debates. And it's not anything serious.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got maybe 3 bits that I ended up turning into poems, and it's good to just sort of, like, get your sort of first thoughts out there and just kind of let them go, let them percolate, and then they might turn into something good.
Mm.
Um, I think
Yeah.
there's this, aesthetic in Japan, known as kurumi, which in the haiku world, people take as humor, and it can be humor, but it's really lightness. So if you look at, like, Japanese brushwork, you'll see that somebody can render something in, like, 3 quick brush strokes, and
Yeah.
it seems, like you say, effortless, but
Yeah.
there are years and years and years of experience behind that. But cultivating that lightness, that ability to sort of let something really seemingly minimal and simple go, and, just not having your ego invested, not
Mm.
needing other people to think that you're clever or a great poet, because in haiku, and the thing I kind of really value about it is it's a form of poetry that I think you begin, but your reader completes. It's really like the reader that is putting a lot of their own experience, and feelings into.
Yeah.
So it's really not about you.
Yeah.
And I think if you ever kind of go around being like, "Oh yes, I am an expert," or like, "I am a great poet," or you know that you're going down the
Yeah.
wrong path.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially people who have done something for a long time, can feel that they're like sort of done learning, sort of. And I feel like I never stop learning. Even with things I feel like I'm good at, I still think I have a lot to learn, you know?
Yeah, it's we started this. This is our 12th episode now. We've recorded
Yeah.
this. Neither of the two of us are expert
Yeah.
writers, but that was never the point. Like every week we do an episode of this, and we write little stories or we write poetry, and maybe our stuff isn't always great, but that's not the point. The point is to grow, and the point is to share and discuss what we've written, and hopefully other people come along as well, and they maybe take a bit of inspiration from that, and they discuss what they've written. And
Yeah.
everyone is always going to be at different levels and different steps of their writing journey. Everyone's always going to be at their own little thing, but sometimes it's just about having the confidence, or as you were saying, Pippa, to kind of like put your ego aside and just accept that that is what I've written. It doesn't have to be amazing. I don't need to think I'm a great writer for doing that. I just let it be. Let it be what it is, and let people think of it what they want to think of it.
I should probably plug another podcast. It's called Poetry Pea.
Yeah.
And I think it was started with that basic idea in mind. The podcaster just sort of starts, recording her journey into haiku and what she's learning about, and I listened to it a lot when I was starting to learn about haiku. She
Mhm.
also has prompts, so you can get
Hmm.
published on it, if you sort of craft a haiku to her specifications. So that's a really good way to get to know about haiku as well. It might have something in common with what you all are doing here.
Yeah, it does. That does sound very similar to sort of
Yeah.
our approach. Yeah, more specialized, obviously, more very much more niche, but it does sound very similar in approach.
Yeah, I think the best poems or the best haiku are the ones that sound like, "Oh, someone's got to have written this before." It's like it's so
Yeah,
obvious, but it's so perfect.
yeah. That's what makes it
Mhm.
comes across so effortlessly, and sorry, so effortless and relatable as well. For everyone listening, we have the task here was we were to take any book of our choice and then write a haiku somewhat inspired about it. Sorry, somewhat inspired by it, or just in some way turn that book or part of that book into some kind of haiku. I've taken a couple of pretty old books. I will start with this one's a little unconventional, and that's so the poem itself is very unconventional as well because of that. I will read the poem and then I will tell you what the book was. Fragmented mugwumps. Consciousness devours junkie. Haze drifts through decay. I'll read it again.
Yeah.
Fragmented mugwumps. Consciousness devours junkie. Haze drifts through decay. So this is a haiku I wrote in response to the book Naked Lunch by William Burroughs.
I thought it
And
was Burroughs.
yeah, and it's a very I don't even think I like the book. I read it last year for the first time. I don't think I like it. It's quite distasteful and it's quite horrible to read. But I thought it was such an interesting concept, the way it's written,
Hmm.
because he uses this technique called the cut up method. I don't know if you know much about that. But basically, the way he writes a lot of his books is this technique he developed where essentially he writes a story. And imagine you'd written it all on paper. And then you take a pair of scissors and start cutting every word or phrases out onto it and then throw it all on the floor. And then pick
Yeah,
all the paper back up and just rearrange it. And
Hmm.
it's so now it's in a random order. And so your story, the words and the sentences are in a totally random order that he then edits and tweaks a little bit. And then he publishes that as a book.
that sounds like a great way to write a poem.
So it becomes a very, very difficult thing to read. But it's got a lot of very evocative language that's used so that even though you might be reading and thinking, what the hell's going on? You're still feeling things or getting little images in your mind. And when you step back and you think about it, you can start to piece it together. And
Damn.
so I tried to do this haiku in that same way. So what I actually
Okay.
did was I wrote a few lines and it all made sense and it was like kind of put together. But
Hmm.
then I actually started pulling it apart and rearranging it so it sounded less obvious what I was doing. And that's why I'm saying it was very
Wow.
unconventional. And I kind of that's also why I was taking the idea that the way that book was written and making that the way the poem was written. So I thought I would try and do something a little bit different with that. So
Yeah, that was
Yes,
very
fantastic.
interesting. Yeah. I've never read the book or anything, but yeah. Sounds like an interesting concept though.
I'm honestly not even sure if I can recommend the book. It's such a niche interest. It's such a strange thing to read. He has some other books that are in the same way, and they're a bit easier to read
Hmm.
because they're shorter. But it's a very difficult read. It's probably one of the hardest reads I've ever sat through. And
I
there was a few
remember
times I
loving
almost
it
didn't
in
sit
high
through the whole
school.
thing.
There
What
was
was
a
it?
time I have this, like, little, like, teenage boy in my
Mm,
heart, that loves stuff like Burroughs
yeah,
and, like, Bukowski. I was such a
yeah.
huge Bukowski fan for a while. He's actually written some beautiful poetry, like,
Mm,
surprisingly beautiful
yeah,
poetry.
yeah. I like some Bukowski as well. I like the what's the book? Is it Love Is a Dog from Hell? I like
Yeah,
some of the
yeah,
bits in that. Yeah.
yeah.
Fragmented mugwumps. Consciousness devours junkie. Haze drifts through decay. And just to make you aware, mugwumps was like a strange like creature that was in this book. It was
Hmm.
this the whole book is essentially about a guy who is a junkie and it's his sort of delusions fueled through this weird city he's going through and there's adventure. There's actually a movie as well. The movie's
Mhm.
probably
Oh.
easier to watch than the book is to read, but the
Isn't
movie
it a
still
Okay.
really
Cronenberg
good.
movie, or am I
Yeah,
wrong?
it's a Cronenberg movie. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Very bizarre. It's a lot of gross things. They're smoking pest poisons and stuff. I don't know.
Damn.
It's a bit of a wild ride.
Well, he's all about body horror.
He is. I love body horror. That's my favorite horror. So yeah,
Yeah, same. I mean, I don't know if it's exactly my favorite. It's up there, though. I love
yeah,
Cronenberg.
yeah.
Hmm.
Cronenberg, great.
Should I say the book first or
Your
after?
choice. Your choice.
Okay, maybe you can guess because I feel
Go.
like yeah, you could maybe guess what it is. Yeah, okay. Journey of terror. Rejected, shunned, alone. Naive heart. Evil came after. Journey of terror. Rejected, shunned, alone. Naive heart. Evil came after.
Long
So
Day's
it's a
Journey into
classic.
Night by Celine.
Oh, it's a classic. Hmm.
No.
I honestly, it's so hard to try and think of a class. You'll
I have
say it,
no
and then I'll be like,
idea.
"Oh, that makes sense." But
Okay, I'll just say it. It's Frankenstein by Mary
uh,
Shelley. It's one of my
Oh,
favorite books, so I wanted to do that one.
okay.
And
perfect for Halloween.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, I wrote it kind of like the normal type of haiku way with the syllables and all that.
I like it. You definitely captured the essence. I mean, I've actually never read that book somehow. I know it's a classic. I've never read it. I don't actually ever. I don't think I've even ever watched a full Frankenstein movie. It's one of those things where I just know all
Wow.
about it. I know what it is. I know it. I've seen it, and
Yeah.
like I've seen Frankenstein and Scooby Doo,
Scooby-Doo.
but I've never actually sat and read it. But the thing I always remember about Frankenstein is that there's always people who say the monster isn't Frankenstein. The doctor's Frankenstein. It's Frankenstein the
Yeah.
monster because people refer to the monster as Frankenstein when it's not quite true.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's the most I actually know about Frankenstein, to be honest. But it does. I feel like you did capture it with those lines. It captures the vibe anyway that I would expect.
Do you
Okay.
know about how it was written?
Yeah, they had like a little group, and the guy, I don't know what his name
There's, like,
was.
Lord Byron
Yeah, yeah,
and Shelley, her husband, the
yeah,
poet Shelley, and then the doctor Polydori, I believe, and
yeah,
maybe her sister was there.
yeah. And she was like 19 years old when she wrote that. That's insane. So yeah,
She wrote it
Byron,
in one night,
like,
right?
Oh,
what?
really?
Yeah,
Yeah, I believe they had the contest and they were all meant to write a horror story in one night,
That's
and it
insane.
was
I'm
during, like,
yeah,
the year without summer when there was a volcanic explosion, and, so all of the crops failed and they had retreated to Italy.
Mhm.
yeah. I watched the movie about her as well. I kind of want to rewatch because I don't remember all of it. There's a movie called
Yeah.
Mary Shelley. It was really
Mm.
good though.
But can you imagine just writing something in one night when you're 19 and then it goes down
Yeah,
as one of the greatest classics of forever? Like
yeah.
that's wild.
That book is written so well too. I'm like, I don't know how that's possible.
Is it a long book?
No, it's like not that
But like,
long.
it can't be long if you wrote it in one night, surely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it has to be pretty short. Okay, that was a dumb question.
It's perfect, though.
Yeah,
Mm,
Yeah.
that's one I'll need to add to my reading list. That's one I probably should read. I've been trying to get
yeah.
through a few different classics recently, so I'll add that to my list.
I guess I'll do, like, Silver, and I'll see if you can guess the book. Very
Okay.
Okay.
old book. So my poem, and yeah, it does not have the 575 syllable construction.
Yep.
Okay.
I feel like I should probably explain why. It is true in the Japanese tradition that, when you write a haiku, there are 5 on, and then 7 on, and then 5 on. An on is not a syllable.
Mm.
So that's the first reason that English language
Okay.
haikuists do not necessarily use that construction in their poetry.
Mm.
And there's not lineation in Japanese haiku. The sound structure kind of provides the breaks from sound unit to sound unit to sound
Mm.
unit. And it actually stems from a tradition called Renga, and what Renga was a form of cooperative poetry. You can have 10 poets or 100 poets, and they'll get together. And the first person, who's usually the most experienced poet, will write the first verse, which is called a haku. And that will be a sort of 575 on construction. And someone will respond to it with a 7-7 on construction. And then a person will
Mm,
respond to that with a 5-7-5 construction.
Mm.
And what you're sort of meant to do in a renga is you're meant to sort of link to the previous verse, but also you're meant to shift away.
Okay.
So if one verse it takes place inside, you're supposed to shift outside. If you're in a summer season, you're supposed to shift to another season. And there's a lot
oh,
more
okay.
rules that sort of govern the making of a renga. So, like, a certain verse is like the flower verse, a certain verse has to be either like a summer or a winter verse. And if you choose a summer verse later on, it defaults to the winter verse. And you're supposed to sort of create a poem that gives the sort of feeling of a butterfly floating from one flower to another
Mm.
flower without any repetition whatsoever. So rather than sort of developing a theme the way that Western poets tend to do, you're actually meant to sort of shift and shift and shift. And the links are really, really minimal.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you talk about water in one verse, you can talk about liquid, or you can talk about snow, or you can talk about ice, or something like that.
Mm,
So that first verse, the haku, um, is what became the haiku. And Matsuo Basho was very famous for creating really wonderful haku, and people started to collect his haku in books. And that's where haiku kind of comes from, is that sort of long-standing cooperative poetry. But if you were to take an English word that is one syllable, for instance, rain, and you were to try to transliterate it into Japanese, and I actually like wrote it out, you would transliterate it like re, I, n. So
Okay.
that's 3 on and one syllable. So Actually, English haiku, if you do the 5-7-5 syllable thing, is too long, and
Okay.
then English, the sound pattern is very, like, two-step or four-step or eight-step, and that's why, iambic pentameter really suits English, and the 5-7-5, on construction really suits Japanese. It sounds good in Japanese, but you can sort of tell when people try to create, like, these 5-7-5 verses. It's really, really difficult to get it to sound
Mm.
good. So long introduction to my poem, and I do wonder if you can guess the book.
Okay.
It goes, "Mid-fall, she splits an apple into stars. Mid-fall, she splits an apple into stars."
I'm not sure what it is, but I love
Yeah,
that
I love
last
that.
part. Just the splitting the apple into stars. I love that imagery.
Mhm.
I'm
Very
not sure what
Yeah,
it
beautiful.
because when you
is.
cut an apple in half, they do have that pentagram inside of
Mm.
it.
They
Mm.
do, yeah. No, I like that. Yeah. I'm just imagining that's how maybe religious people think God made the stars, just splitting open his apples.
It's funny that you say it because it's, inspired by the Bible, the
Oh,
story of Eve.
okay.
I'm
Really?
kind of an Eve apologist, I was raised by
Okay.
atheists.
Well, I
Yeah.
can't blame her. I'd be reaching for that apple too.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the
Hmm.
original story, God was mad at them because once they bit into the apple of knowledge of good and evil, they would
Yeah.
see that the other tree was the tree of
Mm,
life, which would have given them immortality, and they would have been able to challenge
yeah.
God, so
Hmm.
yeah, it's kind of interesting if you're not religious to
Mhm.
sort of, think about that story because in a way I think of Eve as a sort of Prometheus,
Okay.
right? She's bringing knowledge to people, and it's knowledge of
Yeah.
good and evil, right? Like, knowledge is not exactly a
Mm,
neutral thing.
yeah.
I also really love to associate it with, like, Apple computers because the Apple logo is a bit in Apple. And if
Yeah,
Hmm.
you
yeah.
think about the internet, it definitely is the knowledge of good and evil.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's very true.
Yeah.
So Ryan, you sort of guessed the
Well,
thing that
yeah,
she was
I brought up
writing
God,
from.
so
That's impressive. I had no idea. I just assumed I hadn't read the book. And if I had read the book, I still kind of wouldn't be able to guess, I think.
And it has, I guess, a couple of sort of lessons, because traditional haiku, it's not just about the sound construction. Every traditional haiku has to have a nature reference
mm,
in it.
Yeah, okay.
So in Japan, it's called a kigo word.
okay.
So what a kigo word is either a word or a phrase that is associated with the season. Moons are associated with fall. Cherry blossoms are associated with spring. Dragonflies are associated with summer. Snow is associated with winter. And haiku poets will kind of carry around these Kigo word dictionaries called Sajiki with them. So if they're sort of like trying to make sure that they have, a Kigo word in there, they'll sort of like flip through a Sajiki and make sure that they're using the sort of proper Kigo word. And it
Yeah.
also connects your poem to every other poem that's used that Kigo word. So if you write a poem about cherry blossoms, you can consider yourself as sort of contributing to this cherry blossom super poem.
The cherry
Oh,
blossom super
okay.
tree with all these branches and little poems hanging off
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. That's a nice
Yeah.
image.
No, I really like that. That just that,
Yeah, me
especially
too.
that last part, just the idea of the splitting apples into stars. No, it was
Hmm.
really good. I like that a lot.
Yeah, thank
Very
you. Thank
beautiful.
you.
I don't know if you'll get this one. I feel like it's a little bit more vague. This is another classic I've taken. It's a novella, but anyway, unrequited love, overbearing loneliness. It was never true.
Hmm. Very
Mm.
interesting.
Is
Mm.
it Love in the Time of Cholera?
No, no, it's White Nights by Dostoevsky.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I have not read that book.
No, it's a very very short. It's more like a short story. I can't even remember. I think it's like 60 pages or something. It's not very much at all. But the whole thing is just basically it's a very old but depressing story, and it's this man and this girl he meets when he's wandering the nights, and he's a very lonely man, and she's also very lonely, and he almost mistakes his obsession over her for love essentially, and in the end, it basically all ends in extreme heartbreak. But the whole point was he wasn't to me anyway. The whole point was he wasn't really in love with her at all when he thought he was, because this thing happens over like 3 days, and it was just he was so lonely that this happened, and she was sort of leaves him and goes for someone else and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, it was a very depressing poem. I'll read this one more time just since I only
Yeah.
read it once. But unrequited love, overbearing loneliness, it was never true. Yeah, it was very simple this time.
Yeah, but it captured like the
Yeah,
sort of depressing vibe you talked about. So
yeah,
yeah, leaves you
yeah.
thinking.
Thinking,
Yeah,
thinking. Yeah, I hate thinking sometimes, but yeah, it has to happen.
yeah. I don't think you would be able to guess this, but I'll read it first and then I'll just say silent, no breathing. Veils fall, layers peel off. They can't see you yet. Silent, no breathing. Veils fall, layers peel off. They can't see you yet.
Is it The Invisible Man?
No.
I
That
have no
would
idea.
be. It's The Witches by Roald Dahl.
Oh,
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite books growing up. I used to listen to like a little cassette with the
Mhm.
like read when I went to sleep like a lot. So yeah, that's one of my favorite like stories.
I remember there's Square Feet.
They're square
Yeah,
feet.
there's so much weird stuff going on.
Yeah.
I was going to ask your cassette. Do you get are those in English or are they in Norwegian when you listen to those
Norwegian, yeah.
cassettes? Norwegian. Yeah. Wonder. No, I don't actually remember that. But I've got like such faint memories. I remember in school when I was very young. I think we had it in class, and I think I have some sort of memory of reading this.
Yeah.
And a couple other Roald Dahl books as well. But that one specifically, I don't really remember much. You said Square Feet there, and that sort of is bringing some memory to me, but it's so vague that I don't know.
I just think
Yeah,
of
they
the
had square
wigs.
feet that they would put into their pointed shoes. They would, like,
Yeah.
shove it into their pointed shoes.
It's like foot binding.
Yeah,
Almost.
yeah.
That's horrific, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Poor witches.
Yeah.
Well, at least they were choosing to do it.
Yeah,
Were they?
Yeah, but like
to
they
conceal
couldn't.
themselves.
Yeah.
I can't really say if it fits the book because I can't remember the book that well, but I liked it. And I liked the line about the peeling off as well.
Yeah.
I feel like you use a lot of peeling in poems and stuff, you right?
Yeah, I don't know
It keeps to
why.
be a recurring thing, and I always every time you
Peeling.
say it, I'm like, oh, why am I feeling this peeling? It always makes me uncomfortable when I hear about peeling things.
Yeah, but in
But it's
that book, they're in a room and they like take off all of their like I don't know, human costumes because they don't really look like a normal person. So they
yeah.
have like wigs and like clothes to hide that they're witches. So yeah, peeling
Okay.
off
That
because
makes sense.
they're in like a witch conference style thing.
So, my second one comes from a book by Natsume Soseki,
Okay.
who's one of my favorite writers. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you read this book that I've written the poem about. If you read him, I would recommend that you read a book called I Am a Cat. It's
Mhm.
about, a sort of stray cat that is more or less owned by an academic, but it's kind of like a humorous book that just sort of makes fun of human life from the perspective of a cat.
Okay.
And, this one, though, is called Kusamakura, which directly translates to grass pillow, but I think that if you find an English translation of it, it's usually translated as The Three-Cornered World. It is a really
Hmm.
short book, and I started reading it because they said that it was Soseki's attempt to, write a haiku in the form of a book.
Okay.
And
Oh.
so as I was reading it, I was writing haiku in response to the protagonist, who is an artist who goes into the deep forest. He leaves the city and goes into an inn in the deep forest and is trying to reconnect with nature in order to advance his art. But he ends up writing a lot more poetry than he does making sketches. So my poem goes like this. Memories of rain, no need for mosquito nets in a poem.
I forgot what the word was, but so with the rain part, that would be the word that ties that to nature from what you were saying
Yeah,
before. So
Mm.
that's
the
your poem.
Kigo word. Yeah.
I'm starting to try and identify those things. Like, okay,
Yeah.
there's the Kigo word. Okay, so just notice that. Can you say that again?
Memories of rain. No need for mosquito net in a poem.
Okay.
I think mosquito as well is a Kigo word.
Okay, so you got two in there. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not supposed to do that. That's
Oh, you're breaking the
verboten.
Really?
rules.
Yeah. Especially if you have, 2 Kigo words from different seasons, that's a
Mm,
real no-no, but,
okay.
one of my favorite poems does that. I think it's by Julia Bloss Kelsey,
Mhm.
and I think it goes something like, "Winter tulips, not time for the kids to get up." Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I wish I had remembered it perfectly, I usually do.
I'm
Um,
impressed that you remembered it as well as
Yeah.
that. That sounds like it was probably pretty close.
Mm.
but yeah,
Impressive.
she's a poet I really love, Julia Bloss Kelsey.
Mhm.
Mm.
I like how you said that it was about the book that it was like a response. You had the what I'm trying to say. The book that was written as a haiku. It was supposed to. I like the idea when things are written in these sort of new and different ways, even when they don't always work out perfectly. It's like the book I was talking about earlier, Naked
Mhm.
Lunch, by Burroughs. It's not necessarily that I like the book, but I like the attempt to write something differently. And so I would even be interested to read, for example, that book you mentioned, since it was written almost as to be a book, a haiku as a book. To me, that's
It
so
is
interesting.
short.
Yeah, to me,
It is
that's so
short.
interesting.
It's just that, so I love Soseki, he's one of my favorite
Mm,
writers, and he's written one of my favorite haiku. He was friends with Masao Kashiki, who is the sort of the forefathers of haiku, Shiki
okay.
is the sort of, most modern one. So this is around the 1900s or something, and these are writers who are being very much informed by Western notions.
Mm,
So I believe the poem that Soseki wrote, and it's been translated in a way that it's maybe not accurate to the Japanese version, but it does have that 575 thing.
mm.
But it goes, "Oh, leaves, ask the breeze, which of you will scatter first from the verdant trees?"
Oh, I like that.
Mm. That's very pretty.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and so it's really
Mm.
nice, but typically, he's known for his humor. He's almost got a sort of Jane Austen-esque vibe
Hmm.
where you read
Mm.
him and he's got this sort of, like, very polite, humorous evisceration of human foibles that is a sort of continuum throughout most of his works. Kusumakura is really earnest, but it's not the most fun of his books that you could read, so
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think I Am as C a Cat is my favorite one.
that
It's
cat
pretty
one
long,
sounds
though.
so
It's a
interesting.
doorstopper.
Yeah, the cat one does sound very interesting. Just I like the different perspective as well, just the perspective of whatever's going on from the eyes of the cat and stuff. I just like anything that's to me. I love anything different, even when it's never done well. I just like seeing different things just for the freshness of it or just the alternate perspective. So I always appreciate things like that.
I don't know if you've ever heard of Wabi Sabi,
I
if
have
it
not.
sounds kind of familiar.
The only thing is it sounds familiar because I've heard wasabi before, but that's the closest thing I've heard.
Yeah, so there's 2 elements, one of them means something like rust,
Okay.
and one of them means something like unfinished, but it's sort of the beauty of imperfect things, and the best sort of representative of it is kintsugi. So kintsugi is when you sort of break a cup apart and you mend it together with a sort of gold leaf glue
Yeah.
so that it actually looks more beautiful after it's broken.
Mm.
And, you know, there's also this concept of mono no aware in Japan, which is the beauty of fleeting things. So one of the
Yeah,
reasons
I've heard
that
about
people
that.
love cherry blossoms in Japan is because they last for a really short time. So
Mm.
they're thought to be kind of more beautiful for this.
Mhm.
And then there's Karumi, which is like humor or lightness. There's Yugen, which is mysteriousness. So haikuists are really aware of all of those aesthetics. And these are just all of the things that you can lose by sort of beginning and ending with the syllables. And if you try to practice these concepts or aesthetics, and you're also counting syllables, it's
Yeah.
really difficult, right? Like, so if you just kind of, if you want to come back to the syllables, that's great, but if you push it aside for a moment to learn about the other aesthetics, I think it can be a really sort of rewarding experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not to overly simplify that, but it just kind of reminds me of if you're writing a poem and you focus too much on trying to rhyme lines rather than the other parts of the poem, it's probably I would say, would you say that's probably a fair sort of comparison?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I think so. Getting out of those sort of patterns, and I know, like, I like to compare haiku to sonnets because if you look at a sonnet, it's naturally Italian, it's not an English,
Yeah.
form of poetry, and if you look at, like, the Petrarchan sonnet as opposed to, like, the Shakespearean or the Spenserian sonnet, the rhyme pattern reflects the fact that it's much easier to rhyme in
Mm.
Italian because of the verb endings,
Yeah.
and it's
Mm,
much more
okay.
difficult to rhyme in English. So you're able to sort of like vary the rhyme scheme. But then the sonnet has evolved. And you currently have people writing sonnets that don't have any rhyme scheme at all, and you're like, "Well, what makes a sonnet?" And it's because the sonnet is not just about the rhyme scheme, it's meant to be an ode, it's
Yeah.
meant to have a turn or volta,
Hmm.
so if your knowledge of sonnets kind of begins and ends with the rhyme scheme, it's actually kind of like superficial understanding of that poem.
Yeah. It sounds like people are just being taught the wrong things. I mean, I was genuinely taught in school. I think I was probably 9 years old, and they taught us, well, we're going to write haiku, and we wrote them, and it was 575, and that's what we were taught. And so I think this is just a problem of maybe people bringing something from another culture or another language and all that sort of thing that they don't quite understand, simplifying it, teaching it, and then everyone grows up thinking that's what that is. But in reality, you're missing 80% of what actually makes that thing what it is. You've been taught a simplified version to make it like more digestible for a different culture, essentially.
It's just I think, I've been a teacher, and I've talked to English language teachers about this, and I think the Haiku Society of America has actually tried to lobby teachers to stop doing the 575 thing,
Okay.
but it's just
Yeah.
such a perfect fun way to teach kids syllables.
Mm.
I don't think when you're taught that in school that they're really trying to teach you, deeply about what a haiku is.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people have an idea that haiku has something to do with nature.
Yeah.
I think that is
Okay. Yeah.
in the sort of mainstream conception. It's not exactly wrong because in Japan, yeah, there is that 575, sound construction. It's just on and on aren't syllables.
Mm.
And I think, like, a lot of the time, the first pass of learning something is a little bit superficial and it's
Yeah.
fun, and you can a lot of people have a lot of fun, you know, sort of using that syllable counting as a constraint for their
Mm.
writing. So I don't wanna hate on that at all.
I'm gonna ask you to tell us about uh, your Mad Libs thing.
Yeah, so it's this new thing that
Hmm.
I'm doing. I've been doing it on Twitter. I don't know if you're familiar with Mad Libs, but
A bit,
when I
yeah.
was in junior high, we would have these sort of paragraphs, and you'd have kind of a story, and there would be blank words, and they would ask you for like a noun or like an
Yeah.
adjective or something, and you'd fill it in, and you'd come up with this wild story because it's sort of random what you're putting in. So I kind of took the idea and I've been applying it to haiku.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I've been doing it on Twitter, but I'll probably put out a book of these sooner or later. So I will ask you all to give me an adjective, an
Okay.
adverb, and a verb, and then I'll tell you what poem you've written.
Now I'm going to overthink this. And
Yeah.
Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. There's no wrong answers. All of them from both of you, but if you both wanna start by just giving me an adjective, I can construct the poem, and I'll at the end, I'll let you know what you've written.
Let's go with huge.
Huge.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. That's the first thing that came to mind.
No, it's good.
Um, Purple?
And next, I'll look for an adverb, especially an ly adverb. Someone gave me "nevertheless," and I was like, "Oh, it actually does work," but it was a little bit complicated.
Accordingly.
Accordingly. Nice.
Does carefully work?
Yeah, perfectly. And now I need a verb.
Sit?
Sit.
Sit? I
Sit.
like that.
Okay, I'll have stand.
Perfect.
Wow.
Yeah.
Creative.
I know. I felt like everything I kept thinking of just felt so boring. And then I just, You said sit, so I'll say stand.
Even if it's simple,
Yeah.
I swear it works.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Ryan, here's your poem. Huge moon, how accordingly the tides stand.
Okay.
Wow.
It
Huge
actually
moon.
kind of works, right?
It does.
Yeah, it does. It does.
It
No,
does.
huge
That's
moon.
very
How
interesting.
accordingly the tides. Yeah.
Hmm.
No, I
Yeah,
like that.
huge moon, how accordingly the tides stand.
I like
And your
the.
poem,
Yeah.
Silver,
Yeah.
is purple moon, how carefully the tides sit, which
Okay.
Hmm.
is very
Wow.
nice, right?
Yeah.
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 That's very different, even though some of the words are the same.
Yeah. Changing
It
those
gives
few
you a very
things.
different feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. So purple moon, how carefully the tides sit,
Yeah.
and huge moon, how accordingly the tides stand.
Mm.
I like the accordingly the tides stand. It makes it
Yeah.
seem like this the tides have just stopped in place. It's like time is frozen or something. I
Mm.
really like that.
And you wanted a noun, so I do have another poem if you want to try this again.
Sure.
So first I need a noun.
I'm gonna say frog.
Perfect.
Should I do it too?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Oh, just since you're
My
the one
bad.
asking. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Phone.
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 Perfect. And now I need an adjective from both of you.
Fast.
Flat.
Flat. Ooh, that's good. And now the last word that I need from both of you is a body part.
Oh, body
Body
part.
part.
Mhm.
Oh,
Elbow.
nose.
So I'll start with Silver,
Okay.
since we started with Ryan last time. A bird on a phone. It's flat song in my nose.
I like that.
I really like that. That's funny. I
Yeah.
like that.
And so a bird on a phone. It's flat song in my nose.
Mhm.
Get
And
that song out
Ryan,
of your nose.
your poem is a bird on a frog. It's
Okay.
fast song in my elbow.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's because I'm tapping my
Interesting.
elbow to the beat, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very
Perfect.
interesting sort of way to
Yeah.
write. I like it.
Yeah. So, what I'm going to ask you to do is to just look around you at your room, at anything that you might see around you. And I want you to write what you see, but not in a sentence. So,
Okay.
you're going to write fragments. For instance, you might have a half full cup, right?
Yeah.
You can say just like a cup, but if you describe it a little bit, that usually helps.
Yeah.
So you can say like berry chapstick, for
Okay.
instance,
Empty
or
glass.
yeah,
Yeah.
empty glass, or I have this artificial snow globe,
Yeah.
Okay.
or artificial snow ball.
But you're not actually writing sentences. You're not actually joining. It's like you're just observing and saying, "That's what I see. That's what I see. That's what I see."
Okay. So how
And you
many
wanna come up with, like, 3
things?
to 5 of
Okay.
these phrases
Okay.
of
All
what
right.
you're just sort of seeing around you in your room.
I have a dusty desk, empty glass, stuffed parrot, flaky spoon, and unopened parcel.
Oh,
Ooh, I like
interesting.
unopened parcel.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too.
Leaky
Yeah.
spoon, you said?
Flaky spoon. That's a very
Flaky
straight.
spoon.
Yeah, because I will show you. I have this really big wooden spoon, and it's kind of the bits of wood are kind of flaky that are on it, and I just thought
Oh.
flaky spoon. It sounds really strange, but it kind of works.
Hmm.
It also says world's greatest stir because apparently I used to stir shit.
Why, why do you have that in your room?
I don't know. I don't even remember where I got it. I think my mum gave me it for Christmas or something.
Wow.
And do you have, any phrases, Silver?
Yes. Tilted lamp,
Ooh.
patterned mask, black diamond ring. I just had 3.
Ooh.
So
Um, I just want to tell you about the black diamond ring
yeah.
because when I studied philosophy and I studied logic,
Yeah.
I studied symbolic logic, and So like there's pretty specific function operators in symbolic logic. So like
Okay.
negation, you use a tilde. With and, you use like either a sort of like upside down V, or you use the symbol and. With or, you use an inverted
Okay. Yeah.
V. And the possibility operator is a diamond, a black diamond.
Oh,
So it's always I have written far too many poems about black diamonds and their
really?
possibilities.
Huh.
So I did give you a link to the Kigo word list.
Yep.
This is a
Yes.
list that is compiled by the Yuki Teke Society. If you just Google Kigo words, and the
Yeah.
way that you spell it is Kigo,
Okay.
you can find a list of Kigo words. And so what you're gonna do is, probably we should go to autumn, since we're in autumn, and we
Hmm.
should take a look at some autumn Kigo words and see if any of those words kind of juxtapose with the phrases that you make. And that is how you're going to write a haiku poem.
Okay.
And you can, at this point, you can sort of flesh things out. So I will go to the season word list right now and take a look at autumn. So I, like you, Ryan, had a cup, um, and mine was half full of tea. So I had a half full cup,
Mm.
and I feel like autumn rain pairs well with it.
Okay.
But that's not enough for a haiku, so I'm just going to say, autumn rain, what remains of my half full cup?
Okay. I see.
Oh.
Artificial snow, sometimes I wonder if I'm real.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
So are we doing one for each of the things we wrote, or okay?
You can write it for each of them, or you can write it for 1 or 2 or 3 of them. The reason I ask people to come up with, like, 3 to 5 phrases is so that they almost certainly will have
Yeah. They have
something
some
that
options.
that
Yeah.
can
Okay. Yeah.
work with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Let me see. What can I use? I don't think this is right. I'm going to read this to you. So I wrote a stuffed parrot, the scarecrow that protects my belongings. That's not quite right, is
I
it?
like that.
That's
Does that
so
work, or
cool.
is that not quite right?
I think that works, yeah. Yeah, I like this idea of a scarecrow parrot. Now I
Yeah.
wanna put a parrot up in a cornfield.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I was just thinking. I was like, I almost kind of wanted to like link it somehow to pirates or something, since the parrot, and often you hear that in pirates, but I couldn't think of anything
Yeah.
for
And I
that.
mean, you can do that, like,
Yeah.
this is haiku, but with senryu,
Mm.
although you like to use concrete elements, you don't need to sort of have that nature element in there.
Yeah.
So you could have, like, stuffed parrot, and then you could talk about, pirates at that point.
Okay. Yeah.
So you could say, like, "What's underneath her eye patch?"
I see.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I did another one. I'm not
Okay.
I'm not sure about this one again. I'm still trying to right. So this one is flaky spoon. Mushroom gathering has never been so crunchy.
I love that. That's a great
So that
senryu. A
works.
lot of kurumi.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think I get it then. I was just trying to like understand it. So I think I get it.
This turned out kind of weird. Should I read?
Mm,
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay, the first one I wrote two. Lonely dark days. A tilted lamp is the only light.
I love that. That's not weird at all.
That's yeah. I don't know why
Yeah.
it's weird.
I don't know. I just felt like I didn't quite understand everything, but yeah, I tried.
That's great. It's fantastic.
Thank
I
you.
feel like it's publishable.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. The next one. The loss I'm waiting for. The black diamond ring lost in the leaves.
I like the black diamond ring, lost in the leaves.
Thank you. I was struggling with what else to put.
What about
Um.
autumn equinox? The black diamond ring lost in the leaves.
Yeah.
What if, you just took away the second loss? So you could say, "The loss that I'm waiting for," and then the black diamond ring in the leaves.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, that's
yeah,
cool. Yeah,
yeah. It sounds better.
Sometimes it's just, like, one word and you adjust it, and it's all of the sudden it makes
very
sense.
true.
Yeah.
No, I'm someone who likes to spend a long time writing or like analyzing it and reading through it and make changes. So yeah,
Usually when I have my haiku workshops, I'll have a document and everyone will sort of put their poems on it, and we'll sort of workshop it, make suggestions, but then I find a lot of the time if I look back after a week or 2, I'll look back and then suddenly I'll know how to change it the right way.
Yeah, sometimes you need to come back to things with a fresh mind.
yeah,
It's like if you're trying to solve a crossword puzzle and you can't think of the words, but come back an hour later or the next day and suddenly, oh, now I know the word that goes in that crossword puzzle.
yeah,
It's just
Mhm.
your brain needs to think in a different way, and you have to come back to it with a new mind.
yeah.
Yeah.
Also, sleeping on it
Yeah,
helps.
I had 2 that I think I read as I was sort of coming up
yeah.
with them, and then I had, Discarded Headphones, The Sound of Autumn Loneliness,
Oh,
and Birds of Passage, The Christmas Lights Up Too Soon.
Mhm.
mm,
I like the headphones one.
yeah, me
I
too.
like the way that goes with the yeah.
Whiptail Journal actually has an issue that was the prompt. You come up with 1 word, and my word was, drown word, which is a palindrome. But there's a weirdly famous haiku, I think it's by Cord Vander Heuvel, and it's, tundra. But what it is it's this huge white page, and then in very minimal type, you have tundra.
I quite like that. It's very clever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very clever.
yeah.
I like that sort of play on it. But it's actually quite amazing to think because you would think, okay, one word to write your haiku or whatever, and you would think, oh, that's how can you do that? People would think, how are you supposed to do anything? But then you get exactly as you just said, and it becomes almost you can do a certain format with it, or as you just said, as a palindrome. So it's not just as
Mhm.
simple as just taking a word, but it's what does that word represent, or the way you display the word can almost give it just as much meaning as what the actual word is. And
Mhm.
so it opens it up to a whole different way of being creative and thinking about it. So I do quite like that idea.
No, that was very fun to try. Very different to what I'm used to. I'm used to not putting a lot of rules on my writing. Maybe just a few.
Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, kind of fun to try. And also, you say that you try to like break out of the rules too. So I like that. You can sort of know the rules, but like not
Mm,
necessarily have to follow them.
Do you
yeah.
think you'll, continue to sort of write some haiku now and then?
Yeah, I already tried to write some haiku, but without knowing much. I do like writing poems a lot, so I definitely will try and look into like more of like how you actually are supposed to write them, and like yeah, I would love to.
I think we're very likely as well, just talking about the haiku. I think that in future episodes, we tend to do a few different writing things. Like we'll have a story, and then maybe we also have a poem that we talk about. And for one episode, we did do haiku before. I think it was our superhero episode. We were talking about
Yeah,
superpowers and stuff.
Mhm.
So it's very possible that in future episodes, we'll probably have little haiku sections as well, where we'll try and throw in haiku for certain things. So that'll be fun
I
to
should
go
let
back
you
to.
know, there's also something called a haibun, which
Okay.
is sort of a prose poem sort of, it's almost like a story,
Yeah.
and then you can add a haiku after it, so that's like a haibun.
Ah,
okay,
And then
okay,
there's
oh.
tanka, which is, a sort of like the sound construction in traditional Japanese
Mm,
tanka is 5-7-5-7-7, and it's like a lyric form of poetry,
okay.
but in English language poetry, we usually think of it as like a 5-line poem that
Yeah.
is
yeah,
more
okay.
lyrical and emotional than haiku.
Well, I really like that. What did you say it was called? The first one with the prose attached?
Haibun.
Hi, Boone. I like the idea of that. We done a couple of things where we've maybe written a poem. I think it was we done a myths episode, and it was Silver wrote a little
Mhm.
poem about what this creature she had created, and then her story right after was following on from that poem, and it was about this creature and the myth and stuff. And I
Yeah,
think we had another episode where we did something similar, where we wrote a poem and we also wrote a story that was connected. So it would be cool to actually have a real thing such as the High Boon and
Yeah.
actually
Mhm.
do that instead of doing our own little disjointed thing. It would have actually been cool to have had a
Mhm.
real thing for that. So that's maybe something I would look into.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
yeah,
trying
it's very
out
fun.
like different types of writing anyway, so we would
Yeah.
love to try like
Okay.
most of the things we haven't tried yet, you know?
I feel like I've learned so much. I feel like I've not learned so
Yeah.
much about a topic for a while. So you've been actually really great. So thanks for being part of this, Pippa,
Yeah,
because
thank
I feel
you.
like I've learned a
Yeah,
lot.
thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love hearing about people's interests in writing. So yeah, that's been very informative.
Yeah, and it's been a different style of episode for us as well because
Hmm.
normally we are very, I'd say we're more prose focused. We do more stories probably than anything recently.
Mm,
But it's and even when we have done poems, it's usually a poem and then also a story. But it was nice to just dive deep into one specific thing, being the haiku.
Yeah.
So it was nice just to stick to the one thing for the whole 90 minutes or so that we were recording, rather than
Hmm.
we did 20 minutes of this and then 20 minutes of this. So it was nice because you can't dive as deep when you kind
True.
of dive from topic to topic. So it was fun for that.
yeah, yeah, well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to, haiku evangelize as I do.
And of course, anyone watching should go check out Pippa. Where should people find you if they want to find you?
Well, I'm Pippa-esque on pretty much everything. I think I have a TikTok and Instagram where it's, Pippaesque, and I have a Ko-fi shop where I sell my mini chapbooks and my stickers and prints and,
Mhm.
bracelets, and pretty soon I will be selling these Haiku Mad Lib books,
Oh.
for people. So I'm working with, another artist who you can find at Less Ethereal, on Twitter. He's a great haiku poet, and he also does this wonderful abstract sort of line work, so we're working together to put out, this mad haiku book.
So thank you everyone for watching, and we will be back next week.
Bye.